Hello, this is my video update for September 23rd, 2025. And there's a lot going on in the Western world right now, especially with these pipeline wars, the sanctions from the EU, the proposed sanctions, resistance to those sanctions, and pressure from the US on Russia. So let's jump right into things. First of all, the Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commissioner President, has proposed a 19th sanction package. This sanction package targets Russia. The 19th one, the first 18 did not persuade Russia to stop its war goals in the Ukraine, but this 19th one is definitely going to do the trick, right? So this package does a lot of different things. The main focus of it, though, is targeting the imports of LNG, liquefied natural gas, from Russia into Europe. Now, most of Europe is already off Russian oil and gas. Most of the EU, before the war, Europe got a lot of its energy from Russia, very cheap energy. There were already pipelines built. Some of these pipelines have been around for 50 years or more, but they were able to buy this cheap energy, and it really was important, especially for German industry. But now they're off of that, and they're paying a lot more for their energy. And of course, this makes the U.S. LNG companies very happy because they're making a fortune off of this. But anyhow, so let's jump into things. So this package also targets Russian banking, the Russian merchant fleet that is transporting oil and gas around the world to customers. It targets crypto, Russian crypto, and a number of other things. But like I said, the main focus is on Russian LNG, banning Russian LNG. Now, there was already a ban in place, but it didn't start until 2028. This sanction package would move that ban up to 2027. So that would escalate things for sure. And EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was really excited when she proposed this sanction package. That definitely gets her going. She loves talking about this stuff. It makes you kind of wonder, like, what else does she have going on? I know she's got, now, this is a lady who has 7 children. 7 children. She's got a medical degree. There's a lot to admire about her in her personal life, but in her, as far as her politics and her geopolitical stances, she seems to like nothing more than to move things towards World War III. And she almost talks with glee about these sanction packages. It's a little bit disturbing, to be honest. So I looked into things regarding this package, the oil and the gas, and mainly there's 2 holdouts. Most of Europe has already gone along with her wishes. They're off of this stuff, but there's 2 main holdouts, and those 2 are Slovakia and Hungary. And so how dependent are they on this cheap Russian energy? Well, turns out they're very, very dependent on it. So Slovakia imported slightly more Russian oil in 2024 than they did before the Ukraine war. Russian gas makes up about 86% of all of their gas imports, actually. So they're almost completely dependent on it. And primarily, they receive this from the Druzhba pipeline, especially the southern leg of the Druzhba pipeline. Now, that pipeline was built in 1964 and 65, and it was built with money from the USSR, and which existed back then, and also with money and effort from the countries that it goes through. So it goes from Russia into Belarus, and then into these various Eastern European countries. And so Slovakia has already paid for this pipeline. It's been around for 50 years, and so they have a big stake in keeping this oil flowing through this pipeline. Like I say, their infrastructure is already paid for. All they have to do is just buy the cheap gas, and they're getting it at a big discount right now. But the EU is trying to shut this down. Um, the other main country that's dependent on it is Hungary. And Hungary imported close to 5 million tons of Russian oil in 2024, similar to Slovakia. In fact, these are small countries. And they're, like I say, they're heavily dependent on this. They actually increased their dependence on Russian oil from 61% in 2021 to 86% in 2024. So Slovakia is dependent on Russian oil 87%, and Hungary is dependent on it 86%. And again, they also get it primarily from the Druzhba pipeline. Now, this sounds like a lot, 5 million tons of oil. It sounds like a lot. But again, these are small countries, and Russia actually exports about 240 million metric tons of oil a year. So the 5 million that they're sending to Slovakia, the 5 million that they're sending to Hungary, this is only a couple percentage points of their overall oil exports. The U.S. and the EU are really targeting these. They want unanimity. They want all 27 EU countries to stop buying their oil from Russia and their LNG. But as far as actual impact, it's not really going to make much of a difference. Like I say, it's just a small bit. You're talking about 10 million metric tons out of 240 million. So recently, Russia signed a deal with China, and they're building a new pipeline. It's going to be built by 2030, I believe, and it's going to go from the Russian oil fields down through Mongolia, all the way into China. And so all of the oil that used to go to Europe, that supplied European industry with cheap and reliable energy, that oil is now going to go to China, and it's going to fuel Chinese industry, and it'll be far away from NATO, so where they won't be able to blow it up. And that's another thing. When this war began in the Ukraine, the Nord Stream pipeline that flowed under the Baltic Sea from Russia to Germany, and so which Germany was heavily dependent on for their industry, and really led to a boom in German heavy production. That pipeline was blown up. Now, who blew it up has been somewhat of a mystery. When it was blown up, there was a couple of different European diplomats and officials who immediately texted out thank you to the United States for blowing it up, which is a bizarre reaction, really. Because if you talk about it in purely economic terms, this was a devastating blow to Europe. Devastating. But when you look at it in geopolitical terms, you can kind of see where they're coming from. If they wanted to force Europe to get off of Russian energy and to have to buy much more expensive U.S. energy. And so, recently Germany said that they believe that it was a Ukrainian group that went out there in a sailboat and blew it up. That seems unlikely to me. I would venture to say it was probably U.S. Special Forces, something like that did it. But we don't know for sure yet. But Russia has identified some people that they say, or excuse me, Germany has identified some people that they say did this. So who knows? But I would just say that if these Ukrainians were involved, I imagine that it was probably planned and with by the U.S. and with a lot of U.S. help. So maybe they were involved. Who knows? But at any rate, who did this? Who did blowing up the pipeline help? Well, that's a good question. So, in the immediate aftermath of blowing it up, I remember reading reports in the media about how the Russians had blew up their own pipeline, and that was kind of strange. They had no incentive at all to blow up their own pipeline. They were making a lot of money by selling their oil to Germany and other European countries. Um, they had invested billions in this pipeline along with the European countries. And so there was really no incentive at all to blow up their own pipeline. Russia definitely did not do that. Um, so that was just false. The people who benefited from it the most were surely U.S. LNG companies. So this kind of gets at what the war is really all about. Really, is energy. Who is going to supply Europe, which is a huge customer base? What, 400 million people, something like that? Who is going to supply all those people with energy in the future? It was Russia to a large degree. Now it is the U.S. And what company sells the most LNG from the U.S. to Europe? It is Cheniere Energy out of Houston, Texas. They have benefited a lot from this war in Ukraine, from the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline. They have been benefited tremendously. They export about 70% of their LNG to Europe. Now you got to think about it. They get this gas. They have to cool it way down to ridiculously low temperatures. Then they store it and they ship it across the ocean to Europe. And it has to be warmed back up and then used over there. So this is not inexpensive. This is cheap. Europeans are paying 30 to 50% more for their energy now, buying it from companies like Cheniere. And what has this done for Cheniere's stock? Well, it's up 358% over the last 5 years, according to the last time I looked. 358%. That's incredible. If only we had known to invest in that when Nord Stream was blown up, would have made a lot of money. Um, so, who is benefiting from all of this? U.S. LNG companies are definitely benefiting. And Donald Trump, the U.S. president, is putting a lot of pressure on Europe to go ahead and get completely off of Russian LNG so that companies like Cheniere have even bigger captive customer base. These are people who they'll have nowhere else to go other than U.S. LNG companies for the most part. Right now, U.S. LNG companies provide Europe with about 45% of what they buy. That number is probably just going to increase in the coming years. And so this war is definitely it is a horror on the battlefield. You have hundreds of thousands of people dying. You have cities and towns being blown to bits and pieces, families destroyed. It's a human tragedy. But when it comes to economics, there are some clear winners. Companies like Cheniere are making a fortune on all this blood that's being spilled in Europe. It's truly sad. Now, Ursula von der Leyen seems happy to go along with President Trump. She's very eager to ban these sales of Russian LNG, and it looks like she might win this round. Now, like I say, Slovakia and Hungary are heavily dependent on Russian energy, but they're small countries and they're a little bit at the mercy of the EU. So the EU owes um, Hungary a lot of money that it has kept. It takes this money into the central offices there in Brussels, and then it dispenses it back out. much like the United States government. And they actually owe Hungary 250 million, or excuse me, 250 billion euros. This is money that's owed to Hungary. It's not money that they're just giving them out of the goodness of their heart. Um, it's owed to them. And what's going to happen? So this money has been frozen by the EU because, or I said, excuse me, I gave you a wrong figure there. I said 250. It's 22 billion. So 22 billion is owed by the EU to Hungary, and they've kept this money because they disagree with Hungarian internal politics under Viktor Orban, the prime minister there in Hungary. He is a social conservative. He sometimes comes to the United States and speaks at conservative groups in the United States. He's a friend of President Trump, actually. They're political allies on a lot of these domestic policies. And he's very popular with the right wing in U.S. politics. Um, but the EU despises Viktor Orban. He's kind of the bane of their existence, you can almost say. And they have sanctioned Hungary again and again for their internal politics. So the EU aspires to be a single union, a national union, kind of like the U.S. government became over time. Eventually started out as a collection of states. Over time, it accumulated more and more and more power, and eventually it could dictate to the states what happens. And the EU, that's exactly what they want. People like Ursula von der Leyen, she grew up in EU circles. She's always been very close to the European project, and that's her goal for sure. And she's used her position to punish Hungary for their internal policies. So what she's going to do to get them to acquiesce to her demands that they pass this 19th sanction package, because it has to be unanimously approved by all 27 member states. She's going to bribe Hungary with its own money. So she says that she will give them um, a portion of 550 million euros of their own money that shows them of the 22 billion if they sign off on this 19th sanction package. So Hungary's kind of, they have an election coming up next year, and Viktor Orban seems to be in a little bit of political trouble. He's been in power for a long time there, but the EU definitely encourages his rivals. There's a lot of support from various NGOs, the same people um, who pushed the color revolutions in Eastern Europe. Those same exact people would love to see the overthrow of Viktor Orban in Hungary and see a more globalist government come to power there. Now the economy is hurting some, and so 550 million euros, that would help. Of course, the 22 billion that the EU owes Hungary, that would help a whole lot more. But there's some indication that maybe Hungary will go along with this demand from Ursula and the EU and agree to this 19th sanction package, despite the fact that it's really not in their interest to do so. And Orban would like to see peace with Russia. It's very clear he's not really friendly towards Zelensky. He doesn't like this war. He wants to see this war ended, and he would like to see good relations restored with Russia. So that's a little bit of what's going on. Now, this 19th sanction package won't actually affect the 5 million metric tons of oil that Hungary and Slovakia each are getting through the Druzhba pipeline. Those will keep going. And that's Kiev in the Ukraine, the capital there. They're not very happy about that. They would love to see this pipeline closed off for good. and those countries kind of brought to their knees and forced to submit to the dictates of the EU, which is run by their political allies. But so this sanction package will only target the LNG. It won't actually target the oil that's coming from the Druzhba pipeline. So it might pass. It might pass. They might be able to bribe Slovakia and Hungary with their own money and force them to acquiesce on this. Now, Kiev does have a few other tricks up their sleeves. A few things that they can do. Recently, they attacked the Druzhba pipeline. They attacked it at a station in southern or western Russia, and it temporarily shut down the pipeline. They hit it with some drones, and of course that made Slovakia and Hungary, who are dependent on that oil for their survival, it made them pretty angry. They denounced that attack. They they did some symbolic actions against the Ukraine, but nothing concrete really. And and so that happened. Now it was quickly repaired by the Russians. They they have a stake in doing that. They would like to see good relations with these countries continue and support their trading partners there in Eastern Europe, and also divide the EU. They'd like to see the EU divided, of course. They have a incentive to do that. So they would quickly repair the pipeline, and the Hungarian economic minister, he thanked the Russians for doing so, for quickly getting the oil flowing again, and it is flowing right now. And the Slovak foreign minister said that he hoped that now the Druzhba pipeline, the southern leg of that pipeline, would be safe and the oil could continue flowing. So that's kind of where we stand now. The oil is flowing, but any day the Ukraine could hit it again. Zelensky there in Kiev, he said that recently that he would not allow Hungary and Slovakia to continue to buy oil from Russia. That was some statement. He said he would not allow it, as if he as if he could dictate policies to these other sovereign countries. You know, they talk all the time about in the EU about the sovereignty of the Ukraine and how its borders should be respected, and their decisions on internal matters should be respected. But when it comes to the sovereignty of Slovakia and Hungary, there doesn't seem to be much respect for their sovereignty at all. So that was interesting. It makes me wonder if a new attack is coming soon, and what repercussions that will have. But it seems clear too that Ursula von der Leyen, she's pushing for future sanctions against Hungary and Slovakia and Russia to be passed without unanimous consent. Basically, going back on the spirit of the EU. It was originally it was an economic union, and then they said, well, on foreign affairs, we need unanimous consent to take action. So essentially a confederation. But now they're trying to move to more of a federation. It's the same, like I say, it's the same steps that the United States took, very similar anyhow. And the central government there in Brussels is gaining more and more power, and they want more and more power. And so we'll see if they're able to enact future sanctions against Russia, future actions opposed by Slovakia and Hungary without their consent. That's entirely possible. Um, so that's what's going on in the news right now. And thanks for watching, and we'll be back with you soon.